Barry Gibb still chokes when he speaks his youngest brother's name. Andy wasn't just the baby of the Gibb family, he was the dazzling star who seemed destined to eclipse them all. His smile lit up every stage, his voice soared to the top of charts, and for a brief moment, he carried the promise of a future even brighter than the Bee Gees themselves. But behind that golden image was a boy unraveling. The sudden fame, the crushing expectations, the loneliness that no spotlight could cure. Andy bore it all in silence. And Barry, the older brother who had given him his first songs and guided his rise, has admitted he didn't always know how to save him. That silence has haunted him for decades. Now at last, Barry has revealed the truth, and what he has confessed about Andy's struggles, about the guilt he still carries, and about the love that never faded has left fans in tears. So what did Barry finally admit about his youngest brother? And why does his revelation change everything we thought we knew about the Gibb family? Andy Gibb's story began not in the glare of the spotlight, but in the shadow of three older brothers who had already defined the sound of a generation. Barry, Robin, and Maurice were household names by the mid-70s. They had weathered the ups and downs of fame, fought through rejection, and reinvented themselves into the global phenomenon known as the Bee Gees. Andy was the youngest by nearly a decade, still a teenager when their songs were dominating airwaves around the world. To the public, he seemed blessed with the perfect shortcut, an automatic entry into success. But the truth was far more complicated. Barry took Andy under his wing, determined to give him a chance to step out on his own. The first step was music written with love and guidance. I Just Want to Be Your Everything, penned by Barry, would become Andy's debut single. It wasn't just a song, it was a coronation. Practically overnight in 1977, Andy was transformed from a boy with a guitar into a global star. His debut album, Flowing Rivers, quickly reached platinum status. He wasn't merely Barry's younger brother anymore. He was Andy Gibb, the heartthrob with the golden voice, the solo artist who could rival even the Bee Gees themselves. Fans saw Andy as effortless charm. His face graced magazine covers, his smile carried the innocence of youth, and his stage presence seemed to radiate joy. To a generation still adjusting to disco's dominance, Andy embodied the excitement of something new. A star who could sing ballads that broke hearts while also delivering up-tempo hits that packed dance floors. Every move he made was watched, photographed, and celebrated. Girls screamed when he walked on stage. Record executives predicted he would be the next Elvis. For Barry, it was both a triumph and a relief, proof that his youngest brother had the talent to stand alone. Yet the bond between the two brothers ran deeper than music. Barry wasn't just Andy's mentor. He was also the protective older brother who had always looked out for the baby of the family. In private, Barry guided Andy through the chaos of the industry. Rehearsals, recording schedules, media appearances. He reminded Andy to stay focused, to trust his instincts, to be grateful for every opportunity. But behind those moments of encouragement was a subtle tension. Barry had lived through the crushing weight of fame himself. He knew the danger of believing in your own invincibility. Watching Andy rise so quickly, without the years of struggle that had hardened the Bee Gees, made him quietly fearful. Fame, when it came too fast, was often the most dangerous. By the late 70s, Andy's career was unstoppable. 3 consecutive #1 singles in the United States placed him in the record books. He hosted television specials, made guest appearances on hit shows, and even joined the Bee Gees on stage for historic performances. To the outside world, it seemed the Gibb family had produced not 1 but 4 stars, each capable of shaping popular music. But Barry later admitted that even in these moments of triumph, he noticed the cracks forming. Andy was young, untested, and suddenly burdened with responsibilities he couldn't fully grasp. The world demanded perfection, and Andy, for all his gifts, was still trying to figure out who he really was. The irony was devastating. Andy had everything his brothers had once fought desperately to achieve. Yet he didn't have the years of experience that had taught them how to survive it. Barry saw both the brilliance and the fragility. He had given Andy the tools to shine, but he also sensed how fragile the foundation was beneath him. For fans, Andy's rise was meteoric. For Barry, it was bittersweet. The pride of seeing his brother succeed was matched by an unease he couldn't shake. He later admitted that he sometimes wondered if success had come too easily, too quickly, for Andy. And as the decade closed, those fears would prove painfully justified. If Barry helped Andy reach the stars, why does he now confess that those very heights might have pushed his brother toward the fall no one could stop? By the time Andy Gibb was 20, he had achieved what most singers could only dream of. #1 records, sold-out tours, television appearances. His every move seemed gilded. Yet beneath the surface, the machinery of fame was already grinding him down. The speed of his rise left little room for normalcy, and the pressure to keep delivering hits became suffocating. Andy was not just competing with himself, he was competing with the towering legacy of his brothers, who by then were the undisputed kings of pop thanks to Saturday Night Fever. For a young star, the comparison was both flattering and crushing. The music industry is not a forgiving place. In Andy's case, it demanded constant output. There was no pause between recording sessions, press tours, and performances. While the Bee Gees had endured years of obscurity and failure before stardom, Andy never had that learning curve. Fame had come suddenly, and with it came expectations he wasn't prepared for. Managers and producers treated him like a machine, while fans assumed the smile on his face meant he was thriving. The reality was different. He was lonely, exhausted, and seeking relief in ways that would only deepen his struggles. Barry later admitted that he saw the warning signs early. He had watched his brother grow increasingly dependent on distractions, parties, relationships, substances, anything to dull the relentless pace. But Barry was also balancing his own pressures. The Bee Gees were at their peak, touring worldwide, recording albums that defined an era. He wanted to be there for Andy, yet he was often an ocean away, consumed by commitments he couldn't escape. In hindsight, Barry has confessed that this distance is one of his greatest regrets. He was the one Andy trusted most, and yet too often he wasn't present when Andy needed him. The strain between family and fame grew heavier as Andy matured. To the public he remained the golden boy, but within the family tension brewed. The Bee Gees had built their success on discipline and unity, but Andy sometimes resisted that structure. He wanted freedom, the ability to live on his own terms, and the independence to make choices without being overshadowed by his brothers. That independence, however, came with consequences. He was still very young, still learning how to manage money, relationships, and a career that demanded perfection. Without the grounding his brothers had gained through hardship, Andy stumbled. The more he struggled, the more the comparisons to the Bee Gees weighed on him. Fans loved to call him the fourth Bee Gee, but Andy wanted to be more than a younger echo of his brothers. He wanted to carve out an identity of his own. The pressure to do so, while simultaneously living up to their legacy, was almost unbearable. Barry, for his part, tried to reassure him. He reminded Andy that he had a gift, that he didn't need to compete with anyone. Still, Barry has admitted that words weren't always enough. Fame doesn't allow for softness, it demands resilience, and Andy at his core was sensitive in ways his brothers were not. By the early 1980s, cracks began to show. Missed performances, cancelled appearances, and whispers in the press hinted at deeper issues. The family tried to intervene, but often found themselves frustrated, not knowing how to bridge the gap between love and tough love. Barry has said that watching Andy unravel was one of the most painful experiences of his life, because he saw both the brilliance that could have carried him forward and the fragility that kept pulling him back. The weight of fame was crushing Andy, but the strain of being a Gibb made it even heavier. To the outside world he had everything: looks, talent, family connections. Inside he felt the opposite, isolated, compared and misunderstood. Barry would later confess that this imbalance, glittering success paired with hidden despair, is the truth he has never stopped grappling with. If Andy was already faltering under the weight of fame, what would happen when the very life he had built began to collapse, and Barry realized he might not be able to save him? By the early 1980s, Andy Gibb's bright ascent was dimming. What had once seemed unstoppable, his charm, his chart-topping singles, his effortless presence was unraveling before the public's eyes. Cancelled concerts became more frequent. Headlines shifted from celebrating his music to questioning his reliability. Behind closed doors, his health was faltering, his finances slipping, and his spirit weighed down by battles no amount of applause could drown out. The truth was harsh. Fame had not simply pressured Andy. It had consumed him. The constant demand for perfection had led him to habits that weakened his body and fractured his relationships. By 22, Andy had already lived a lifetime of dizzying highs and devastating lows. His romantic relationships, so often splashed across tabloids, reflected the same pattern: passionate beginnings, turbulent middles, and painful endings. Each heartbreak left him more vulnerable, more uncertain of where he belonged. Barry, looking back, admitted that these years still haunt him. He could see Andy slipping, and he tried again and again to pull him back. Sometimes it was a phone call, a quiet word of encouragement, or a reminder that music was still his anchor. Other times it was stern pleas for Andy to take his life seriously, to take better care of himself. But Barry's own commitments with the Bee Gees made it impossible to be by Andy's side consistently. The guilt of that absence is something Barry has carried for decades. The contrast between Andy's public image and his private pain grew sharper. Fans still screamed for him, still bought his records, still believed in the golden boy they had fallen in love with. But Andy himself began to withdraw. Performances became sporadic, interviews strained, and the once effortless smile grew harder to maintain. He was young, talented, and adored, but inside he was exhausted and deeply lonely. Barry has since admitted that the family didn't always know how to reach him. They loved him, but they were also frustrated, confused, even angry at times. They didn't want to lose him, yet they struggled to find the balance between support and accountability. In 1987, Andy faced a collapse that could no longer be hidden. His career stalled. He was let go from projects that had once seemed guaranteed successes. Financial troubles mounted. His health suffered to the point where even those closest to him feared the worst. For Barry, the hardest part was watching his younger brother, once so full of promise, become a man weighed down by regret. Barry confessed that he would replay moments in his mind, times when Andy had asked for help, or when Barry had chosen to focus on his own obligations instead. The what-ifs became endless, and they still echo in his reflections today. The final years were a mixture of fleeting hope and deepening despair. There were moments when Andy seemed ready to recover, when his voice returned to its brilliance, when he talked about new beginnings. Barry and the family clung to those glimpses, praying they would become permanent. But just as often, there were setbacks, abandoned plans, missed opportunities, and the crushing reality that Andy was not winning the battle with himself. For Barry, these years are a wound that never healed. He has spoken of the helplessness, the feeling that no matter how much he wanted to protect Andy, the distance between them, physical, emotional, and professional, was too great. He had given Andy the gift of a career, but he could not give him the strength to carry it without breaking. On March 10, 1988, Andy Gibb died at just 30 years old. The world mourned the loss of a singer whose light had burned too briefly. For Barry, it was more than a tragedy. It was a lifelong scar. He has admitted that even now, decades later, he replays those final years, wondering if he could have done more, wondering if his brother's story might have ended differently. For years after Andy's passing, Barry rarely spoke in detail about the youngest, Gibb. Interviews skimmed the surface, and public appearances kept his grief behind a polished smile. But privately, the silence weighed on him. He carried the ache of unanswered questions, the torment of what he could have done differently, and the knowledge that success had not been enough to shield his brother. Barry has admitted that his role as Andy's mentor became a double-edged sword. He was the one who handed Andy the songs that made him famous, the one who opened the doors of the industry, the one who encouraged him to step boldly into the spotlight. Yet with time, Barry realized that those very gifts had also exposed Andy to pressures he was too young to bear. Andy had skipped the years of hardship that built resilience in the Bee Gees. Fame came without foundation, and Barry now believes that he helped build a tower too tall for Andy to climb safely. There was also the distance. While Andy fought his battles, Barry was stretched thin by his own career, writing, touring, and promoting music at a global scale. He wasn't always there when Andy stumbled. He wasn't always near when Andy reached out. Looking back, Barry has admitted that this is the wound he can't close, the moments where his absence might have made a difference. The thought that he could have been the anchor, but wasn't, has followed him ever since. Even when Barry was present, he struggled to know how to help. Andy was sensitive, more fragile than the rest of the brothers, and the old tools of discipline and toughness didn't always work. Barry sometimes pushed when Andy needed comfort, or held back when Andy needed guidance. These mismatched moments haunt him. He has said that he still replays them in his mind, not because he doubts his love, but because he doubts whether his love was shown the right way. What makes Barry's confession so piercing is his admission of silence. He has spoken of wishing he told Andy more often how proud he was, how much he mattered simply as a brother, not just as a singer. Too often, their conversations circled around career, music, or the chaos of fame. Too rarely did Barry pause to remind Andy that his worth went beyond the charts. That silence became its own regret, an emptiness Barry cannot fill. Yet the heart of Barry's confession is not despair, but devotion. He has described hearing Andy's laughter in his memory, feeling his presence whenever he sings, and carrying his spirit into every performance. His grief has never fully lifted, but in sharing it, Barry has allowed fans to glimpse the depth of his love. It is this vulnerability, the honesty of a brother revealing both his mistakes and his enduring devotion, that has moved listeners most. In Barry's words, they hear not only loss, but an extraordinary testament to the bond between brothers. If confession gave Barry a way to unburden his grief, what did he do after Andy's passing to turn that sorrow into something lasting, something that would keep his brother's memory alive for generations? In the aftermath of Andy's death, Barry faced a choice: to remain silent and bury the pain, or to transform it into remembrance. Slowly, he chose the latter. The first step came through music. Whenever he stood on stage in the years that followed, Barry found ways to honor Andy. Sometimes it was by performing a song that Andy had once carried to the top of the charts. Sometimes it was by mentioning his brother's name quietly, as though reminding the world and himself that Andy's story was not over. These gestures were subtle, but to fans, they meant everything. Tributes grew into legacy. Barry began to speak more openly about the challenges Andy faced, not to diminish him, but to humanize him. He explained the toll that sudden fame could take on a young star. He acknowledged the fragility that Andy had hidden behind his smile. In doing so, Barry reframed the narrative. Andy was not simply a fallen idol, he was a beloved brother whose story could serve as both a warning and an inspiration. With time, Barry also came to understand that Andy's place in the Gibb family was unique. While Robin and Maurice had shared Barry's long career, Andy remained forever young, the baby of the family, the one they had all once tried to protect. His absence created a silence that no success could ever fill. Even decades later, Barry admitted that family gatherings and stage performances alike felt incomplete without Andy's presence. It was a wound that time could dull, but never erase. Yet Barry also spoke of joy. He reminded fans that Andy should not only be remembered for the struggles of his final years, he was also the boy who made them laugh at family dinners, the young man whose charm filled every room, the singer whose voice could stop an audience cold. Barry's final truth was simple: Andy was more than the tragedy. He was love, laughter, and music, and that is how he should be remembered. For Barry, speaking this truth has been a form of healing. It does not erase the regret, nor does it silence the ache of what was lost, but it transforms grief into something enduring. By keeping Andy's memory alive in song, in story, and in the hearts of fans, Barry has ensured that his youngest brother's legacy did not fade with his final breath. Today, as the last surviving Gibb, Barry carries not only his own history, but the stories of Robin, Maurice, and Andy. Of all the truths he has shared, none have struck deeper than the ones about Andy. They reveal a brother still mourning, but also still loving. Proof that family bonds outlast even the harshest tragedies. Barry's final truth is not about despair, but about devotion. And it is this devotion, the confession of love that endures, that has left fans in tears even decades later. Barry Gibb's words about Andy are not confessions of scandal, but of love and regret that never faded. For decades, he carried the silence of an older brother who felt he should have done more. By finally opening up, he has reshaped Andy's legacy, transforming it from the story of a star lost too soon into the portrait of a young man who was cherished, fragile, and unforgettable. For Barry, speaking this truth has been both painful and necessary. Painful because it forces him to confront the memories that still sting, the moments of absence, the unfinished conversations, the feeling that time ran out too quickly. Necessary because silence had become its own burden. In sharing his heart, Barry has lifted some of that weight and allowed the world to see the depth of his devotion. For fans, the impact has been profound. They see beyond the headlines of Andy's struggles, and instead remember the joy in his voice, the sparkle of his smile, and the bond of brotherhood that even tragedy could not break. Barry's honesty has reminded them that Andy was not just a singer but a son, a brother, and a spirit whose presence lingers long after his final song. And that, ultimately, is the truth. Barry wanted the world to know. Andy was more than the youngest Gibb, more than the fragile star whose life ended too soon. He was the heart of the family, the laughter that brightened their days, the light that continues to shine through memory and music. In the end, Barry's confession is not a story of loss, but of endurance. Love that survives absence, grief that deepens connection, and a brother's promise that Andy will never be forgotten. For more emotional stories, check out this video.